Hello, and welcome to Baker Street Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee, or, in our case, a steaming glass of Mrs. Hudson's excellent mulled wine. Tonight, pull your armchair closer, for I, Dr. John Watson, shall recount one of the strangest affairs that ever came before my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A tale of snow upon the cobblestones, murder beneath the mistletoe, and a crime that very nearly extinguished the light of Christmas itself. Chapter 1: The Frosted Visitor. Hello, and welcome to Baker Street Fireside, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee, or, in our case tonight, a steaming glass of Mrs. Hudson's excellent mulled wine that carries the scent of orange peel, clove, and just a suspicion of brandy. Pull your armchair closer to the hearth, draw the blanket to your chin, and let the wind howl outside as it will. For I, Dr. John H. Watson, late of the Army Medical Department and chronicler of the extraordinary, am about to recount one of the strangest affairs that ever came before my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. A tale of snow upon the cobblestones, murder beneath the mistletoe, and a crime that very nearly extinguished the light of Christmas itself. It was the 23rd of December, 1895, and London lay beneath a mantle of snow thicker than any I had seen in all my years upon the earth. The flakes had begun at dusk the previous day, and had not ceased since. Great feathery plumes that drifted past our windows at 221B Baker Street like the down of some immense white bird. By morning, the thoroughfare was a smooth, unmarked expanse, broken only by the parallel grooves of sleigh runners and the occasional brave hansom cab, whose horse snorted steam into the frigid air. I had spent the better part of the afternoon attempting to imbue our sitting room with something resembling festive cheer. A modest fir tree, procured at no small expense from Covent Garden, stood in the corner, its branches already shedding needles onto the Persian rug. Paper chains of red and gold dangled rather drunkenly from the gaselier, the handiwork of your humble servant and Mrs. Hudson's kitchen maid. Holmes, of course, had contributed precisely nothing to the decorations beyond a single raised eyebrow when I had inquired whether he might care to assist. He reclined upon the sofa in his mouse-colored dressing gown, one long leg draped over the arm, the other stretched toward the fire. A small pile of correspondence lay scattered about him like the aftermath of an explosion in a paper factory, and his violin rested upon his knee, as though it were an extension of his very bones. The bow moved languidly across the strings, drawing forth a melancholy arrangement of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen in a minor key that somehow made the carol sound as though it had been composed for a funeral rather than a celebration. "Really, Watson," he murmured without opening his eyes, "your paper chains resemble the efforts of a concussed spider, and that tree leans at an angle which would disgrace the Tower of Pisa." "Your criticism is noted," I replied, stepping back to survey my handiwork. "But even the most rational of men must occasionally bow to the season. Besides, Mrs. Hudson has threatened to withhold her mince pies if we do not make some concession to Christmas." Holmes gave a soft snort that might have been amusement. "Mrs. Hudson's mince pies are a force more powerful than logic. Very well, continue your assault upon good taste. I shall endure it." I was in the act of hanging a final string of cranberries when the bell below rang with a violence that made both of us start. 3 sharp pulls, then 2 more, as though the caller's hand trembled with agitation or cold. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps hurried along the passage, and presently her voice floated up the stair. "Dr. Watson, there's a young lady to see Mr. Holmes, half frozen, poor lamb, and in such distress as ever I saw. Holmes was on his feet in an instant, the violin laid aside with reverent care. "Show her up at once, Mrs. Hudson, and bring the brandy, the good one, if you please. Watson, the fire." I seized the poker and stirred the coals to a brighter blaze as our landlady bustled away. The wind had risen during the afternoon. It moaned in the chimney like a lost soul and sent little puffs of smoke curling into the room. I had just succeeded in coaxing a cheerful flame when the door opened again. The figure that entered seemed at first more apparition than flesh and blood. She was wrapped in a long cloak of Russian sable, white with snow that melted in runnels down the fabric and formed tiny pools upon our rug. A muff of the same fur concealed her hands, and a hood shadowed her face so completely that only the gleam of eyes was visible, eyes dark with terror and bright with unshed tears. Mrs. Hudson hovered behind her, wringing her hands. "This way, miss. Mind the step. There now. Doctor, she's fair perished." Holmes crossed the room in 3 silent strides and drew out a chair before the fire. "Pray be seated, madam. Watson, the brandy." I pressed the glass into hands that trembled so violently that the liquid threatened to spill. She drank obediently, a single swallow, then pushed back her hood, and I confess I caught my breath. She was perhaps 22, with a face of such startling beauty that even the pallor of cold and fear could not dim it. Hair black as a raven's wing escaped in damp curls from beneath her hood. Her skin was ivory pale save where the wind had kissed her cheeks to rose, but it was her eyes that held one. Great violet eyes, wide and pleading, that seemed to contain all the sorrow of the season. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" Her voice was low, musical, but threaded with desperation. "They told me in the village that if any man in England could help me, it was you." Holmes inclined his head. "You have the advantage of me, Miss Haverford, Miss Violet Haverford, of Briarwood Manor in Surrey." She drew a shuddering breath. "My uncle, Sir Reginald Haverford, was murdered last night, stabbed through the heart in a locked room while the household sang carols below. The snow around the entire house is untouched, no footprint, no mark of any kind, yet the door was bolted from within, the windows fastened. The police say it is impossible. They say no one could have done it, and yet he is dead, Mr. Holmes, dead on Christmas Eve with a stiletto in his heart and holly in his buttonhole." She pressed a hand to her mouth as though to force back a sob. The brandy glass fell from her fingers and shattered upon the hearth, scattering amber liquid like liquid topaz across the tiles. Holmes did not move, but his eyes had taken on that peculiar gleam I had learned to recognize, the gleam of the hunter who has scented his quarry. "Pray compose yourself, Miss Haverford," he said gently. "Every detail is of importance. Watson, another glass, and a cushion for the lady's back. Now, madam, from the beginning. Leave out not a single snowflake." Violet Haverford drew a handkerchief from her muff, lace-edged monogrammed VH, and pressed it to her lips. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, though the words tumbled over one another in their haste. "Briarwood Manor lies 5 miles beyond Leatherhead. My uncle inherited it from our grandfather 20 years ago, and since my parents died when I was a child, it has been my home. Uncle Reginald was difficult, reclusive. He had not left the estate in 15 years, not since—" She hesitated, then hurried on. "He kept largely to his music room on the first floor. He was a fine pianist, you see. Every Christmas Eve the household gathers in the great hall to sing carols, and Uncle plays for us from above. The staircase curves so that we can hear but not see him. Last night we began at 9 o'clock. 23 souls in all, family, servants, tenants from the home farm. Captain Redvers, that is my fiancé, led the singing. At 11 o'clock precisely, the music stopped. Just stopped. In the middle of In the Bleak Midwinter. We waited for the next verse, but there was only silence. My aunt, Lady Eleanor, went upstairs. She knocked. No answer. The door was locked. We broke it down. Her voice cracked. He was seated at the piano exactly as though he had fallen asleep over the keys. Only the stiletto protruded from his waistcoat, and the blood had soaked through the ivory keys so that middle C was stained crimson. The room was empty. The windows bolted. The snow outside lay smooth as a counterpane. The constable swears no one could have entered or left that room. And yet my uncle is dead, Mr. Holmes, murdered on the eve of our Savior's birth. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the distant chime of a muffin man's bell in the street below. Holmes stood motionless, his thin fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes half closed as though he saw the entire scene projected upon the insides of his lids. "Tell me, Miss Haverford," he said at last, "was your uncle expecting any visitor last night?" "None. He had dismissed the household early. He said he wished to play alone. He was composing, you see. A carol of his own. He called it The Frosted Rose." "And the stiletto, was it recognized?" She nodded, fresh tears starting. "It belonged to my aunt, a curiosity she brought back from Venice years ago. It hung above the mantelpiece in the music room. The police say the killer must have used it on impulse." Holmes's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "Impulse, yes. Watson, my coat and scarf. Miss Haverford, you will remain here with Mrs. Hudson. She will provide tea and whatever comfort a gentleman's residence can offer a lady in distress. You have done your part. The rest devolves upon Dr. Watson and myself." Violet Haverford rose, swaying slightly. "You will come? You will solve this abomination before Christmas is utterly ruined." Holmes was already at the door, his ulster flung about his shoulders with the carelessness of a man who has no time for such trifles. "My dear young lady, I have every intention of restoring your Christmas, though I fear the solution may prove less miraculous than the season demands." He turned to me, eyes alight with that fierce joy I knew so well. "Come, Watson, the game is afoot, and the board is covered with snow." As we descended the stairs, the bell of St. Mary le Bow began to chime the hour. 10 slow strokes that seemed to hang in the frozen air like icicles. Somewhere in the distance, a choir of waits struck up Once in Royal David's City, their voices thin and pure against the vast white silence of the city. I glanced back once. Violet Haverford stood in the doorway of our sitting room, the firelight gilding her pale face and the melting snow upon her cloak. She looked in that moment like a figure cut from some old Christmas card, beautiful, tragic, and utterly alone. Little did I know that before another sun rose, Sherlock Holmes would unravel a knot of villainy that reached back 15 years through the snow-bound corridors of Briarwood Manor, and that the ghost of a child would walk again beneath the holly and the ivy. Chapter 2. The Body in the Snow. The train south from Waterloo was almost empty. Only 2 other souls braved the Christmas Eve blizzard that had swept in behind us like a white curtain drawn across the world. Holmes sat opposite me, his long legs stretched across the compartment, gloved hands clasped over the head of his stick, eyes fixed upon the darkness beyond the frost-laced window. The gas lamp above us flickered with every lurch of the carriage, throwing shadows that danced across his hawk-like features like the ghosts of suspicions yet unborn. I had brought sandwiches wrapped in greaseproof paper and a flask of Mrs. Hudson's excellent coffee, but Holmes waved them away with the abstracted air of a man whose mind is already 3 counties ahead of his body. Instead, he produced from his ulster pocket a small morocco case, opened it, and revealed the stiletto which Miss Haverford had pressed upon him before we left Baker Street. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, tilting the blade so that the lamp caught the wicked gleam of steel. "Italian, 16th century, Florentine, if I am not mistaken. The pommel is a Medici lion. Note the ball caught in the paw. The blade itself is triangular, designed not to cut, but to pierce between mail. A gentleman's toy, yet capable of ending a man's life in utter silence." He turned the weapon slowly, and I saw that the grip was wrapped in faded crimson silk, now darkened almost to black where blood had soaked through. "Miss Haverford says it hung above the mantelpiece for 20 years, yet the silk is freshly stained, and there is a single strand of wool caught in the quillen, undyed Shetland, the color of fresh cream. Curious." I peered closer. "From a lady's knitting, perhaps? Or a gentleman's scarf," Holmes replied, slipping the dagger back into its case. "We shall see." The train lurched to a halt at Leatherhead, with a great sighing of steam that mingled with the snow outside until the platform vanished entirely. A dog cart waited for us, its driver muffled to the eyes in scarves, the horse's breath rising in twin plumes like dragon smoke. We climbed aboard and set off into the teeth of the gale. The road to Briarwood Manor wound through ancient woods, now bowed beneath their weight of snow. Every branch was outlined in white, every hollow filled with soft blue shadow. The wheels crunched over the frozen ruts. The only other sound was the jingle of harness and the occasional stamp of the horse's hoof. Once an owl drifted across our path on silent wings, its eyes luminous as cathedral candles. At length the trees fell away, and the manor rose before us, a great Gothic pile of weathered stone, its chimneys crowned with cowls of snow, its windows glowing amber against the night. Holly wreaths hung upon the iron-studded door. Lanterns flickered in the porch like watchful eyes. The whole scene might have been lifted from one of Mr. Charles Dickens's Christmas tales, were it not for the police constable who stood shivering beneath the portico, his cape white as a miller's apron. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he called, snapping to attention. "Constable Whitstable, sir. Ever so grateful you've come. The inspector's inside. He said to bring you straight to the music room." Holmes leapt down with the agility of a man half his age. "Lead on, constable. And pray tell Inspector Gregson that I require the room exactly as it was found. No dusting, no sweeping, no rearrangement of furniture. I wish to see the stage precisely as the murderer left it." Whitstable swallowed hard. "That won't be difficult, sir. No one's dared touch a thing. The maids are terrified. Say the house is haunted, and truth be told," he glanced over his shoulder at the darkened windows above, "truth be told, I half believe them myself." We passed through a vaulted hall where a Christmas tree soared 20 feet toward the hammer beam roof, its branches laden with wax candles that trembled in the draught. The scent of pine and beeswax mingled with something else, something metallic that caught in my throat. Blood, I realized. The smell of violent death never quite leaves a house. Up the great staircase we went, our footsteps muffled by a runner of Turkey carpet the color of claret. Portraits of long-dead Haverfords glared down at us, bewigged gentlemen in lace, ladies with pearls at their throats and suspicion in their eyes. At the top landing, a Bates door stood ajar. Beyond it, a corridor lit by a single gas jet that hissed softly in the silence. The music room lay at the far end. Two constables stood guard outside, their faces pale above their blue uniforms. They came to attention as Holmes approached, but I saw their eyes slide nervously toward the door. "Gentlemen," Holmes said briskly, "you may stand easy. Dr. Watson and I will be some time." He pushed the door wide, and we stepped across the threshold into a chamber that seemed to hold its breath. It was a large room, perhaps 30 feet by 20, paneled in dark oak that drank the light. A grand piano, broadwood, I noted automatically, stood beneath a tall mullioned window, now sheeted with frost. The keyboard lid was raised. The keys themselves gleamed ivory and ebony, save for one, middle C, stained a dull, unmistakable red. Upon the music rest lay a single sheet, the ink still wet in places. The Frosted Rose, Opus 47, R. Haverford. Sir Reginald's body had been removed to the ice house, but the chalk outline remained upon the parquet, arms outstretched as though the dead man had been crucified upon his own instrument. A dark stain spread outward from the heart region, frozen now into a crimson star. Beside the piano stool lay an overturned goblet. The carpet beneath it was stiff with frozen wine. Holmes stood motionless for a full minute, his eyes traveling slowly over every detail. Then he moved, swift, silent, predatory. He knelt beside the chalk outline, produced his lens, and began to examine the floor inch by inch. "Observe, Watson," he said without looking up. "The wound entered here." He touched a spot just left of the sternum. Angled downward at approximately 30 degrees, Sir Reginald was 6'2", yet the blade struck from above. Either the murderer was a giant or he stood upon something. "Ah!" He indicated two faint scuff marks upon the polished wood, no more than smudges to the untrained eye. "Moroccan leather, size 7, narrow heel, a woman's evening slipper, I fancy. And here," he moved to the window, "the catch is newly scratched. Someone forced it from the outside within the last fortnight, then closed it again. The frost has preserved the marks perfectly." I stared out into the night. The window looked upon a sheer drop of 20 feet to the terrace below. The snow there lay smooth and untouched, save for the delicate tracery of birds' feet. "No footprints," I said. "Precisely." Holmes's voice was soft with satisfaction. "No footprints entering, none leaving. Yet the catch was forced, curiouser and curiouser." He crossed to the fireplace, a massive affair carved with gargoyles and grapes, and ran his fingers along the mantel. The stiletto's empty brackets gaped like a missing tooth. "The weapon hung here," he murmured, "yet the dust beneath the brackets is undisturbed. Whoever removed it did so with great care, wiped the surface clean afterward. A meticulous murderer, Watson, or a murderer who knew the habits of the house intimately." I was about to reply when a faint sound reached my ears, a soft rhythmic creaking from somewhere above. I looked up. The ceiling was decorated with elaborate plasterwork, roses, vines, and at the center a great frozen sunburst. Holmes heard it too, his head tilted like a hound scenting the wind. "The attic," he said. "Come." We left the music room and followed the corridor to a narrow door almost hidden behind a tapestry of the Judgment of Paris. A flight of bare wooden stairs led upward into darkness. The creaking grew louder as we ascended, steady, deliberate, like the rocking of a cradle. At the top, we found ourselves in a long, low attic lit by a single dormer window. Dust lay thick upon the floorboards. Cobwebs hung like gray veils. In the center of the space stood an old rocking horse, its paint chipped, its mane of real horsehair stirring gently in the draft. It rocked slowly back and forth, though no hand had touched it. I felt the hair rise upon my neck. Impossible, I whispered. There is no one here. Holmes moved forward, his boots leaving perfect prints in the dust. He laid a hand upon the horse's neck. It stopped instantly. A simple matter, he said, and I saw that a length of fishing line ran from the rocker, through a pulley in the beam, and out through a crack in the dormer. Someone below tugs the line at intervals to frighten the servants. Childish, but effective. Note the footprints, small, a child's boot, size 3. Yet the dust around them is disturbed in a perfect circle. Someone has been practicing this ghostly performance for weeks. He knelt, brushed aside the dust, and revealed a small trap door, no larger than a chessboard. This, he said with quiet triumph, leads directly into the music room's ceiling. The plaster sunburst is a false panel. A child, or a very slight adult, could descend upon a rope, commit murder, and return the same way. The rocking horse provides the haunting sound, the fishing line the motion, elementary misdirection. I stared at the trap door, my mind reeling. But the snow outside was meant to convince us the murder was impossible from without. In fact, the killer never left the house at all. From below came the sudden clamor of voices. Inspector Gregson, no doubt, growing impatient. Holmes rose, brushing dust from his knees. Come, Watson, we have seen enough for one night. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and I have a fancy to spend it watching certain persons open their presents. For somewhere in this house, wrapped in tissue and ribbon, lies the motive for Sir Reginald Haverford's death, and I intend to find it before the bells ring in Christmas morning. As we descended the attic stairs, the rocking horse began to move again behind us, slowly, rhythmically, like the beating of a guilty heart. Chapter 3. 3 suspects at Briarwood Christmas Eve dawned white and still, as though the world had been wrapped in cotton wool and laid beneath the tree for a child's delight. I woke in a 4-poster bed that smelled faintly of lavender and old secrets, the curtains drawn back to reveal a prospect of lawn and park stretching away to a line of skeletal beeches, every twig outlined in frost. For one peaceful moment, I might have been a boy, again, at my grandmother's house in Derbyshire. Then memory returned like a cold hand upon the heart, and I remembered why we were here. Holmes had risen before me. He is a creature of the night and the dawn alike. And I found him in the breakfast room, standing at the window with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand. He wore a dark green shooting jacket that made him look for once almost a country gentleman, though the keen glitter in his eyes would have betrayed him to the blind. "Good morning, Watson," he said without turning. "Observe the snow. Not a single footprint mars the terrace since yesterday's fall. Our murderer either flew or he never left the house." I helped myself to deviled kidneys from a silver chafing dish. And the household? Assembling even now in the drawing room. I have requested that every soul who was under this roof last night, family, guests, indoor and outdoor servants, present themselves at 10 o'clock precisely. We shall see what the light of day reveals when 23 pairs of eyes are trying not to look guilty. At 5 minutes to the hour we entered the drawing room, a lofty apartment paneled in pale green silk and hung with portraits of Haverford baronets who had clearly never smiled in their lives. A fire roared in a grate large enough to roast an ox. Above it hung a Holbein portrait of a lady with a unicorn, her eyes following one about the room with gentle accusation. Beneath the great Christmas tree, fully 30 feet tall and blazing with 100 wax candles, stood 3 persons who immediately commanded attention. The first was a woman of perhaps 42, tall, Juno-esque, dressed in black bombazine that rustled like serpents when she moved. Her hair was arranged in the severe style of the previous decade, and a cameo brooch at her throat depicted the three graces in ivory. This, I learned, was Lady Eleanor Haverford, younger sister of the murdered man and mistress of Briarwood since the death of Sir Reginald's wife in childbirth 15 years before. Beside her stood a military gentleman of middle height, bronzed by eastern suns, with a mustache waxed to such rigidity that it might have served as a bayonet. His left leg was slightly stiff. He leaned upon an ebony stick with a silver head carved in the shape of a bulldog. Captain James Redvers, late of the 66th Bengal Infantry, fiancé to Miss Violet Haverford, and, as I later discovered, a man who had returned from India with little beyond his wounds in his honor. The third figure was as different from the other two as chalk from cheese, a thin, nervous gentleman in his 35th year, with spectacles that perpetually slid down a narrow nose and hair the color of wet sand. Mr. Percival Finch wore a brown frock coat shiny at the elbows and carried a large ledger as though it were a shield. Sir Reginald's secretary, antiquarian, and, rumor whispered, reluctant heir to a mountain of unpaid bills. These three, with Violet herself pale as a snowdrop in dove-gray wool, formed the center of a larger circle. Housekeeper, butler, maids in starched caps, footmen, the grizzled gardener, Mr. McTavish, and a positive regiment of outdoor servants who had been summoned from the home farm. 23 souls in all, as Holmes had predicted, and every one of them trying very hard to look anywhere except at the empty chair beneath the Holbein portrait where Sir Reginald ought to have sat. Holmes took up a position beside the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, very much the stage manager about to address his company. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly to the furthest corner, "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend, Dr. Watson. We are here at the request of Miss Violet Haverford to discover how Sir Reginald came by his death. I will not keep you long, but I require absolute candor. Let us begin with the discovery of the body." Lady Eleanor stepped forward, the bombazine rustling ominously. "I discovered my brother," she said, her voice clear and cold as the icicles outside the window. At 11 o'clock, the music ceased. I waited for the next carol, but there was only silence. I went upstairs alone. Captain Redvers wished to accompany me, but I refused. A sister's privilege, you understand. The door was locked. I knocked. No answer. I summoned the butler and the footman. We broke it down. Her eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, met Holmes's without flinching. Reginald was seated at the piano exactly as he had been when I saw him last at 9 o'clock, only now there was a dagger in his heart and blood upon the keys. Holmes inclined his head. "Thank you, madam. Captain Redvers, your movements." The soldier straightened, the bulldog stick tapping once upon the parquet. "I was in the great hall from 8 o'clock onward, leading the carol singing. 20 witnesses will swear I never left the room. At 11, I was conducting Good King Wenceslas, page 3 of the Novello edition, if you wish to verify the timing." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the servants. The captain's precision was clearly a byword. "And you, Mr. Finch?" The secretary started like a startled hare. I was in the library, Mr. Holmes, cataloging Sir Reginald's collection of incunabuli. He had acquired a fragment of the Gutenberg Bible, you see, and I was preparing the catalog entry. Alone, I'm afraid. Quite alone." Holmes's smile was thin as a scalpel. 3 suspects, 3 alibis, 1 impossibility. Delightful. He began to move among them, apparently at random, yet I knew better. Every step was calculated. He paused before Lady Eleanor. "Madam, you wear mourning already. though your brother has been dead less than 36 hours. Anticipation or merely efficiency? Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. Both, Mr. Holmes. My brother was not a well man. His heart, you know. I had the gown made last Michaelmas. Holmes's eyes flicked to her hands. She wore black kid gloves, beautifully made, yet upon the right index finger was a tiny dark speck, no larger than a pinhead. He lifted her hand with courtesy, turned it to the light. Blood? He asked softly. Lady Eleanor did not withdraw her hand. Holly, she replied. I was arranging the garlands yesterday morning. The berries stained dreadfully. Holmes released her and moved on to Captain Redvers. Your regiment, Captain, the 66th. You were at Maiwand? The soldier's face darkened. I was. Lost half my company and the use of my leg. What possible bearing? Only this. Holmes indicated the captain's boots, splendid affairs of polished leather with trees still in them. The left heel is worn distinctly inward. You favor the right leg when ascending stairs. Yet last night you claim to have remained below. Curious when the natural impulse of a man in love would be to rush to his fiancée's side. Violet gave a little cry. Captain Redvers flushed crimson. I wished to go, sir, but Lady Eleanor forbade it. I am a guest in this house. Holmes bowed slightly and passed to Mr. Finch, who was clutching his ledger as though it might fly away. Mr. Finch, you're a scholar. Tell me, does the Gutenberg fragment contain the Book of Revelation? The secretary blinked. Why, yes, the latter part of chapter 6. How did you... Because, Holmes said gently, there is a leaf missing from the volume in the library, torn out recently by the look of the stub. And in your pocket, sir, I perceive the corner of a vellum sheet protruding. Pray do not trouble to deny it. Finch's hand flew to his breast pocket. His face went the color of tallow. I intended no theft. Sir Reginald gave me permission to remove certain pages for study. He trusted me implicitly. Trusted you so far that he kept his new will in your desk, Holmes murmured. The will that leaves everything to the home for indigent cats. How very trusting. A gasp ran through the room. Violet pressed both hands to her lips. Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed to slits. Holmes raised a hand for silence. We have motive aplenty. Lady Eleanor, who would lose her home. Captain Redvers, who would lose his fiancée's fortune. Mr. Finch, who would lose his position and perhaps his liberty. We have opportunity, or the lack of it, and we have a locked room, a weapon from the wall, and snow that bears no trace of human passage. He turned suddenly to the row of servants. Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper. You have been here 30 years? 32 come Lady Day, sir. Excellent. Tell me about little Alice. The housekeeper's face crumpled. Poor wee lamb. Died Christmas Eve, 1880. Fever it was. Sir Reginald never got over it. Kept her room exactly as she left it. Dolls on the shelf, boots by the fire. And those boots, Holmes said softly, what size were they? Size 3, sir. Pink leather with pearl buttons. Miss Alice was only 7. Holmes's eyes gleamed like winter stars. Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. You have been most helpful. He clapped his hands once sharply. Ladies and gentlemen, you are dismissed, except for Lady Eleanor, Captain Redvers, and Mr. Finch. I require a private word. The rest of you will oblige me by remaining within the house until further notice. Dr. Watson and I will be examining certain upper regions. As the servants filed out, whispering among themselves, I caught sight of Violet. She stood beneath the Christmas tree, one hand upon a shining glass ornament shaped like a tear. Her reflection stared back at her from 100 glittering surfaces, pale and multiplied to infinity. Holmes paused beside her. Courage, Miss Haverford. By tonight you shall know the truth, and perhaps receive the best Christmas gift of all, justice. She managed a trembling smile. I believe you, Mr. Holmes. I must believe you. We left the drawing room and climbed the great staircase once more. At the top landing, Holmes paused before a small door almost hidden by a tapestry. The nursery wing, he said, sealed these 15 years. Come, Watson, let us lay a ghost. The door opened with a sigh, as though the house itself had been holding its breath. A wave of cold air greeted us, carrying the faint, sweet scent of lavender and death. Before us stretched a corridor lit by a single rose window of stained glass, angels and lambs in jeweled colors. Snowlight filtered through, painting the floor in ruby, sapphire, and emerald. At the far end stood a tiny pair of pink boots, pearl buttons gleaming, placed neatly side by side, as though waiting for small feet that would never return. Holmes knelt, touched the leather with reverent fingers. Still supple, he murmured, oiled regularly. Someone has been visiting this shrine. He rose and moved along the corridor, his boots soundless upon the drugget. Every door stood ajar, dormitory, schoolroom, night nursery. Dust lay thick upon every surface, yet in the center of the schoolroom floor was a perfect circle swept clean, and in the middle of that circle lay a single child's footprint. Holmes's smile was grim. Our ghost has been practicing, Watson, practicing very hard indeed. From somewhere above came the faint, rhythmic creaking we had heard the night before. Creak, 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 like a lullaby sung by the damned. Holmes looked up, eyes blazing with that fierce joy I knew so well. The game, Watson, he whispered, is fairly and truly afoot. Chapter 4. The Locked Music Room. At 2:00 in the morning, I found him in the music room, fully dressed, the gas turned low so that the great piano loomed like a black sarcophagus. He had pushed the instrument 3 feet from the wall and was lying flat upon his back, one ear pressed to the parquet, tapping the floorboards with the handle of his lens as though they were the keys of some secret instrument. Watson, he said without moving, be so good as to fetch the stable lantern. We are going exploring. 10 minutes later, we stood beneath the frost-feathered window, while Holmes swung the lantern in slow arcs across the snow. The beam struck silver from the untouched crust. No print, no scar, no whisper of passage. 20 feet of virgin white between window and terrace. Yet the catch was forced from outside, he murmured. Someone wished us to believe the murderer entered here. Come. Back inside, he locked the door, shot the bolts, top and bottom, turned the key twice, and pocketed it. Then he did a thing I had never seen him do before. He climbed upon the piano stool, reached overhead, and pushed the great plaster sunburst in the ceiling. It swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a black aperture no wider than a hat box. Up you go, Watson. You are broader than I, but younger. A rope ladder of silk cord hung within. I hauled myself into the void and found myself in a narrow shaft, thick with the smell of old plaster and mouse droppings. Holmes followed, cat-agile, and pulled the trap shut beneath us. The lantern showed a crawl space between joists, barely 2 feet high. We wormed forward on elbows and knees for perhaps 15 yards until the shaft opened into a wooden chamber no larger than a confessional. A second trap, this one in the floor, stood propped open with a child's wooden brick. Through it drifted the faint scent of beeswax and holly. Holmes lowered the lantern. We were directly above the nursery corridor. The pink boots waited below like patient sentinels. Note the dust, he whispered. Disturbed in 2 parallel lines, someone has dragged a light ladder along this very path, probably folded, no more than 3 feet long when closed, child's size naturally. He produced a tape measure. From music room ceiling to nursery floor, 19 feet 4 inches. A desperate route, but practicable for a slight person who had practiced since childhood. We descended into the nursery. Holmes knelt by the boots, turned them over. The soles were caked with fresh snow, still sparkling. Placed here tonight, he said. Our ghost is growing bold. From his pocket, he drew the tiny brass key on its faded red ribbon, found yesterday behind the rocking horse, and crossed to a doll's house that stood beneath the window. It was a perfect replica of Briarwood Manor, complete down to the last gargoyle. The front swung open at his touch. Inside, nestled among miniature furniture, lay a second key, identical to the first, but bright and new. Holmes held both to the lantern. One kept by the murderer for 15 years, one cut only last month. The ribbon is modern turkey red, purchased at Liberty's. See the weave. He slipped the new key into the music room door from the nursery side. It turned with a soft click. Thus, he said, the door was locked from within, yet the murderer stood without. The perfect, impossible crime. A sudden gust rattled the window. For an instant, I thought I saw a small white face at the pane, then only swirling snow. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Time to set the bait. Tomorrow night is Christmas Eve. The household will gather for carols at 9. At 11, the ghost shall walk again, and this time we shall catch it by the hand. He led me back through the doll's house, up the silk ladder, across the hidden shaft, and down into the music room. There he rearranged every stick of furniture to its original position, closed the plaster sunburst, and stood a moment in thought. One last detail, he said, and drew from his pocket a single sprig of mistletoe. He laid it upon the closed keyboard lid, exactly where Sir Reginald's dead hand had rested. Ghosts are traditional creatures, Watson. They return to the place of their grief. Let us give our ghost something to grieve for. He turned the key in the lock, shot the bolts, and pocketed both key and mistletoe berry. Outside in the corridor, the grandfather clock struck 3. Somewhere a child began to cry, thin, high, heartbroken, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Holmes listened, head cocked, then smiled the thin, dangerous smile I had come to know so well. Excellent, he said. The trap is baited. Now we wait for the mouse. Chapter 5. Footprints that vanish. Every window blazed. Every holly wreath had been renewed. The great tree in the hall now carried an additional 100 glass icicles that chimed softly whenever a door opened. The servants moved about their tasks with the brittle cheer of people trying to outrun a ghost. In the kitchens, Mrs. Pritchard beat plum pudding mixture as though it had personally offended her. In the still room, maids stirred brandy butter and pretended not to hear the piano playing upstairs, alone. Holmes had vanished directly after luncheon. I found him at last on the roof, flat on his stomach at the edge of the parapet, peering over with a naval telescope. Watson, excellent. Hold this. He passed me a ball of twine. Pay it out slowly. I am mapping the exact line of sight from the music room chimney to the nursery dormer. Snow slid from the slates in soft avalanches as he inched along the gutter. His ulster was white within minutes. His deerstalker perched at a rakish angle that would have scandalized the county. Observe, he called back, voice muffled by scarf and wind. A single set of prints, small, narrow, heel first, leading from the music room chimney pot across the leads to the dormer window yonder. 14 yards in all, yet no prints returning. Curious. I looked where he pointed. The tracks were perfect, each one no longer than my hand, pressed deep as though the walker had been running. They stopped dead at the dormer. Someone descended the chimney? I shouted against the gale. Holmes laughed, a short, excited bark. 14 inches square, Watson. Even a child would stick fast. No, watch. He tied the twine to a chimney stack, then paid it out until the free end hung exactly over the music room window below. With a penknife, he sliced the string, let the loose end fall, and scrambled back to my side. Now come. We descended by the servants' stair, past maids who crossed themselves at the sight of us, and out through a side door into the stable yard. The snow there was drifted waist high, but Holmes plowed straight to the wall beneath the music room window. The twine hung down the wall like a plumb line, its end buried 6 inches deep. See? The prints on the roof were made by someone walking backwards, dragging a light ladder tied to this very string. The ladder was then pulled up after them. Child's play, literally. He dug with gloved hands and unearthed a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a collapsible ladder of bamboo and silk cord, no heavier than a violin case, painted white to blend with snow. Property of the late Master Tommy Haverford, aged 9, who used it to raid the apple loft in 1873. Hidden since his untimely death in the Boer War. Someone has been studying family history very thoroughly. Holmes slung the ladder over his shoulder. Tonight, Watson, we return it to its rightful place. But first, tea. I have need of Mrs. Pritchard's seed cake and her indiscretion. We found the housekeeper in the still room, wrists white with flour, eyes red-rimmed. Mrs. Pritchard, Holmes said gently, the pink boots in the nursery, were they ever soled with rubber? She nodded, puzzled. Yes, sir. Newfangled crepe, 1880. Miss Alice hated the noise on the boards, so Sir Reginald had them done special. Holmes produced one of the tiny boots from beneath his coat. The sole was black with fresh soot. Someone wore these last night, he said, down the chimney and across the roof. Yet the chimney is 14 inches square and lined with Victorian soot thick enough to choke a sweep. No adult could pass, but a child's boot slipped over an adult foot like a galosh. Mrs. Pritchard crossed herself again. God preserve us, it's little Alice come back, or someone who loved her enough, or hated her enough, to keep her memory alive for 15 years. Holmes's voice softened. Tell me, who oils the boots each Christmas? The housekeeper's lips trembled. Lady Eleanor, sir. Every year on the anniversary. Says it's her penance. Holmes's eyes gleamed like winter stars. Penance. Excellent. Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. You have been most helpful. He turned to me as we left the still room. Motive begins to crystallize, Watson. A woman who has tended a shrine for 15 years does not do so out of mere sentiment. There is guilt in every drop of oil. Back in the music room, he laid the bamboo ladder against the wall, climbed 3 rungs, and peered into the chimney. Note the soot, undisturbed except for a single smear at child height. Our murderer wore the boots on her hands, Watson. Climbed down like a sweep's boy, stabbed Sir Reginald, climbed back, pulled up the ladder, walked backwards across the roof, dragging it behind her to lay false prints, then descended through the dormer into the nursery, the perfect vanishing footprint. I stared at the black flue. But the locked door will be explained at 11 tonight. For now, we have a ghost to lay. He folded the ladder, wrapped it in the oilskin, and tucked it beneath his ulster. Come, one more task before darkness falls. We climbed to the nursery. Holmes opened the doll's house, removed the mistletoe berry he had placed there, and replaced it with a single white feather. From a dove in the dovecote, he said. Little Alice kept doves. The ghost will recognize her own. Then he locked the nursery door, pocketed the key, and led me downstairs to the great hall where the carol singers were already assembling. Captain Redvers stood by the fire, brandy glass trembling in his hand. Violet clung to his arm, white as paper. Lady Eleanor sat apart, black bombazine gleaming like raven wings, her gloved hands folded in her lap with unnatural stillness. Holmes paused beside her. "Madam, a Merry Christmas Eve. I trust you will join us for carols?" Lady Eleanor's smile was thin as a knife blade. "I never miss them, Mr. Holmes. My brother plays so beautifully from above." "Played," Holmes corrected softly. "Past tense. Tonight the piano will be silent, unless the ghost chooses to play." He moved on before she could reply. At 9 o'clock the great hall filled. 23 voices rose, and once in royal David's city, sweet and trembling. Holmes and I stood at the back, watching every face. At 11 precisely, the singing stopped. Silence fell like a blade. From upstairs came the first notes of "In the Bleak Midwinter," hesitant, then surer, played on the very piano where Sir Reginald had died. Violet screamed. Captain Redvers started forward. Lady Eleanor sat frozen, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Holmes touched my arm. "Now, Watson, the ghost walks." We slipped from the hall and raced upstairs. The music room door stood ajar. Candlelight flickered within. We burst in. The room was empty. The piano lid was closed. Upon it lay a single pink boot, pearl buttons gleaming, and beside it a child's white feather, spotted with fresh blood. Chapter 6. The Poisoned Plum Pudding. The long table in the baronial hall blazed with candlelight and crystal. 3 roaring fires turned the ancient tapestries into living color. Every place was set, even Sir Reginald's great carver chair at the head, draped in black velvet like a throne awaiting a ghost. 23 souls took their seats in near silence. The only sounds the clink of silver and the hiss of Yule logs. Holmes had insisted on the full ceremony: turtle soup, roast goose, chestnuts, flaming plum pudding, carried in on a silver salver by the butler, Mr. Graves, whose face was the color of the parchment he once ruled as a sergeant major. The pudding itself was a cannonball of suet and fruit, studded with holly, blazing with blue brandy fire. A cheer went up, brittle but genuine, when Graves sliced the first portion. Captain Redvers rose to carve the goose. Violet sat beside him, pale but composed in dove-gray silk. Lady Eleanor occupied the foot of the table, black bombazine gleaming like a raven's wing. Mr. Finch hovered at her elbow, spectacles fogged with nerves. Holmes refused wine, but accepted a modest slice of pudding. I noticed he turned it 3 times with his fork before tasting. The captain received the largest portion, Graves's tribute to the only man in the room who had faced Afghan bullets. Redvers laughed, raised his spoon in salute, and took a generous mouthful. 30 seconds later, the spoon clattered from his fingers. His face turned the color of wet ash. He clutched his throat, eyes bulging. "Cyanide!" I shouted, already on my feet. "Emetic, now!" I seized him by the shoulders, forced him forward, and thrust 2 fingers down his throat. He retched violently. The contents of his stomach splashed across the damask cloth in a hideous stain of half-digested pudding and bile. A faint smell of bitter almonds rose above the brandy fumes. Holmes was already at the sideboard, pouring salt, water from the cruet. "Drink this, Captain, quickly." Redvers swallowed, gagged, swallowed again. Color crept back into his lips. He sagged against me, gasping. "Someone tried to murder me," he croaked. The table erupted. Maids screamed. Footmen froze with platters aloft. Lady Eleanor sat motionless, gloved hands folded as though in prayer. Only her eyes moved, cold, watchful. Holmes lifted the captain's plate with a napkin. "Observe," he said calmly, Only this portion contains the poison. The pudding was doctored after it left the kitchen. Someone at this table added cyanide to the captain's slice alone. He turned the plate so we could all see the telltale white crystals clinging to the underside of the holly sprig. Mr. Finch went whiter than the cloth. I I passed the plate to the captain myself, he stammered. Lady Eleanor asked me to hand him the best part, the piece with the lucky sixpence. All eyes swung to Lady Eleanor. She returned our stares with the serenity of a marble Madonna. Indeed, she said, voice smooth as black ice. I wished Captain Redvers to have the honor. A soldier should find the sixpence, should he not? How unfortunate that Mr. Finch chose to season it with poison. Finch shrank back as though struck. I did no such thing. I merely passed the plate. Holmes raised a hand for silence. We shall let chemistry decide. Watson, if you please, the test. I took the small leather case from my pocket. Holmes had pressed it into my hand before dinner. Inside, filter paper, silver nitrate, dilute acid. I scraped a crumb from the captain's portion, dissolved it, added the reagents. The paper turned brick red within seconds. Potassium cyanide, I announced, enough to kill 3 men. A collective gasp. Violet burst into tears. Redvers, still trembling, stared at Lady Eleanor with dawning horror. Holmes moved to the sideboard, lifted the pudding knife, and carefully cut a second slice. The one that would have been Sir Reginald's had he lived. He tasted it, chewed thoughtfully, swallowed. Perfectly wholesome, he declared. The poison was added here at table after the pudding was sliced. Someone carried cyanide in a ring or thimble, sprinkled it over the captain's portion while pretending to add brandy sauce. He turned to Finch. Your right hand, sir. Finch extended it, shaking. A faint white powder dusted the ball of his thumb. Flour from the still room, the secretary whispered. I helped Mrs. Pritchard stir the pudding this morning. Nothing more. Holmes sniffed the powder, touched it to his tongue. Flour, and something sharper. Cyanide leaves a characteristic numbness. You have been handling it, Mr. Finch, within the hour. Finch collapsed into his chair, spectacles sliding from his nose. I swear I am innocent. Someone is trying to frame me. Lady Eleanor's smile was winter itself. How convenient. First my brother, now the captain. Perhaps Mr. Finch feared exposure. Holmes ignored her. He crossed to the great fireplace, lifted the holly sprig that decorated the poisoned plate, and held it to the candle. The leaves curled. A tiny glass capsule no larger than a pea fell from the stem and shattered on the hearthstone. Clear liquid hissed on the hot iron. Another dose, Holmes said quietly, enough to fell an ox. The sprig was prepared in advance. Someone intended the captain to die tonight, and to take Mr. Finch with him to the gallows. He looked slowly around the table. Every face was a study in terror or triumph. Dinner is concluded, he announced. No one will leave this room until I return. Dr. Watson will remain to ensure it. I drew my old service revolver from my coat pocket. Holmes had insisted I carry it, and took station by the door. 23 pairs of eyes followed my every move. Holmes paused beside Violet. Courage, my dear. By midnight, you shall have your Christmas gift. The truth, gift wrapped in justice. He bowed to Lady Eleanor. Madam, I trust you will keep the company entertained with your recollections of little Alice. I have always found ghosts excellent dinner companions. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Outside, the snow had begun again, great silent flakes drifting past the windows like the souls of the unburied dead. Inside, the plum pudding cooled on its silver salver, the blue flames long since guttered out, leaving only the faint, deadly scent of almonds and betrayal. Chapter 7. The Midnight Carol. The poisoned dinner had left the household stunned and brittle. No one had touched the port. The Yule log spat and hissed like an angry cat. Violet sat between Captain Redverse and Lady Eleanor, pale as the wax candles that dripped steadily onto the silver branches of the Christmas tree. Mr. Finch had been removed to the library under the watchful eye of Constable Whitstable, his wrists bound with a napkin for his own safety. Holmes clapped his hands once, sharp, military. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is Christmas Eve. Tradition must be observed. We shall sing Silent Night together, exactly as we did the night Sir Reginald died. Captain Redvers will lead us. At the stroke of 12, we shall raise our glasses to absent friends." A nervous rustle. Lady Eleanor rose, bombazine whispering, "You would mock the dead, Mr. Holmes?" "On the contrary, madam, I would give them voice." He moved to the foot of the staircase, placed one foot upon the lowest step, and raised his hand like a choir master. The servants, trained to obedience even in terror, arranged themselves in the old places. Violet's clear soprano trembled on the opening phrase. Redver's baritone, still rough from the cyanide, carried the melody. 23 voices rose, thin and wavering into the vaulted darkness above. Silent night, holy night. All is calm, all is bright. At the second verse, the piano joined in from the music room overhead, soft, hesitant, exactly as it had sounded 48 hours ago when Sir Reginald's fingers had faltered and stopped forever. Violet's voice broke on "Sleep in Heavenly Peace." Captain Redverse gripped her hand so hard the knuckles whitened. Holmes never took his eyes from the landing above. The final chord died. Midnight began to strike, 12 slow, solemn notes that seemed to fall through the house like drops of molten lead. On the 12th stroke, the piano lid slammed shut with a crash that rattled the chandeliers. A child's scream, high, piercing, inhuman, echoed down the stairwell. Then silence. Holmes was already moving, 2 steps at a time. I followed, revolver in hand. Behind us, the hall erupted into chaos. Maids shrieking, footmen shouting, Lady Eleanor standing like a black statue amid the storm. We burst into the music room. Moonlight poured through the tall windows, turning the snow outside into a wall of silver fire. The piano stood open, keys gleaming. Upon them lay a single sprig of mistletoe, fresh and green, and across the ivory keys someone had scrawled, in crimson grease paint, "Thief." Holmes knelt, touched the letters with a gloved finger, then brought it to his nose. "Stage blood, Watson. Covent Garden, number 47 Carmine. Identical to the smear on Lady Eleanor's glove, which she claimed was holly berry juice." He crossed to the fireplace. The gargoyles leered down at us. Fresh soot had been rubbed across their stone mouths, giving them the appearance of bloody grins. "Someone has been busy," he murmured, "but not busy enough." He reached up inside the chimney and drew out a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a child's white nightdress, stiff with dried blood, and a tiny mask of painted porcelain. Alice's face, eyes wide, mouth open in an eternal scream. Holmes held the mask to the moonlight. "Worn by our ghost to terrify the servants. Note the elastic. New. Bought at Maskelyne and Cook's theatrical suppliers in Piccadilly last week. The receipt is still pinned to the hem." He turned the nightdress inside out. On the collar, embroidered in faded silk, were the initials, AAH, Alice Haverford. "Yet the blood," he said softly, "is not 15 years old. It is fresh. Someone reopened an old wound tonight." A floorboard creaked behind us. We spun round. Lady Eleanor stood in the doorway, candle in hand, the flame trembling so violently that wax ran down her glove like tears. "You have found her, then," she said. Her voice was steady, but the candle betrayed her. My little ghost. Holmes bowed slightly. Your ghost, madam, has been most obliging. She has left us everything we need. Lady Eleanor stepped into the room. The candlelight carved hollows beneath her cheekbones. She looked suddenly old. Everything except the truth, she whispered. You will never prove it, Mr. Holmes. The snow is untouched. The room was locked. The dead do not accuse. Holmes's smile was gentle, terrible. The dead rarely need to, madam. The living do it for them. He lifted the porcelain mask. Shall I tell you how it was done, or would you prefer to confess beneath the mistletoe where you once kissed a child good night and left her to die? Lady Eleanor's candle fell from her fingers. It rolled across the parquet, guttering in a pool of its own wax. In the sudden darkness, her sob was the only sound. From the hall below, the Christmas tree lights flickered once, twice, then steadied as though the house itself were holding its breath. Holmes struck a match, relit the candle, and placed it on the piano beside the crimson word, thief. Midnight is past, he said quietly. Christmas Day has begun. Come, Lady Eleanor, let us go down and open our presents. I believe one of them has your name upon it. He offered her his arm. After a moment she took it, her black glove stark against his sleeve. As we descended the great staircase, the child's scream came again, fainter now, receding, like a soul finally granted rest. Chapter 8. The telltale pocket watch Christmas morning, 6 o'clock, and the house still trembled from the midnight scream. I found Holmes in the library, surrounded by open drawers and drifts of yellowed letters. Every gas jet blazed. The Holbein lady above the mantel seemed to lean forward, eager for the next act. Holmes's eyes were bright with the fever that always seized him when the chase neared its end. Shut the door, Watson. We have perhaps 2 hours before the household stirs, time enough to unwrap the final gift. He held up a gold pocket watch, half hunter, beautifully chased with roses and thorns. The lid sprang open at his touch, found wedged behind the piano pedal where no honest hand could have placed it, engraved inside, to my darling Eleanor, Christmas 1879, R.H., yet Lady Eleanor swears she never received such a gift. He tilted the watch. A folded scrap of vellum fluttered out like a dying moth. I took it. The ink was faded but legible. The Rubens is hidden in the priest's hole behind the nativity panel in the long gallery. Tell no one until I am gone. Forgive me, sister. R.H. 20th, December 1895. Holmes's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Sir Reginald's last secret. A lost Rubens. The Adoration of the Magi, stolen from an Austrian convent in 79, smuggled home in a grandfather clock, and bricked up behind the carved nativity scene ever since. Worth £20,000 today. Enough to buy a conscience or bury one. He snapped the watch shut. 3 days ago, Sir Reginald discovered someone had been tampering with the panel. He wrote this note, hid it in the watch he meant to give Eleanor for Christmas, then changed his will again, leaving everything to Violet and Captain Redvers. He intended to confess the theft publicly on 12th night and return the painting. Someone could not wait 3 days. We moved to the long gallery, a cavernous room lined with ancestral portraits and one magnificent carved oak screen depicting the Nativity. Holmes pressed the star above the manger. The entire central panel swung inward on concealed hinges. Dust and cold air rolled out. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay a canvas no larger than a tea tray, 3 glowing kings against midnight blue, the Rubens signature clear as a bell. Holmes lifted it reverently, magnificent and fatal. Footsteps behind us. Lady Eleanor stood in the doorway, still in last night's bombazine, a black shawl about her shoulders. Her face was parchment pale, but her eyes burned. "So you have it," she said, "my brother's sin and my salvation." Holmes turned, the painting cradled in his hands. "You knew it was here." I helped him brick it up. "We were young, desperate for money after father lost everything at cards. Reginald promised we would return it one day. One day never came." Her voice cracked. "Then last week he told me he meant to give it back and leave me penniless, after 40 years of keeping his secrets." She stepped closer, hands clenched. "Do you know what it is to be a poor relation in one's own house, Mr. Holmes? To smile while others inherit? I endured it for Alice's sake. Sweet Alice, who caught me prying at the panel that night in 1880. She was only 7. I pressed the pillow over her face to keep her quiet, just for a moment, just until she stopped struggling." Her words hung in the frosty air like icicles. Holmes's voice was soft. "And 15 years later, you used her memory as a weapon. The boots, the nightdress, the mask, all to convince the household a ghost sought vengeance. You climbed the silk ladder wearing Alice's boots over your own, descended through the false ceiling, stabbed your brother as he played, returned the same way, then walked backwards across the roof, dragging the bamboo ladder to lay false prints. The perfect, impossible crime." Lady Eleanor laughed, a dreadful sound. "Prove it. The snow is untouched. The room was locked. The dead girl walks." Holmes replaced the Rubens gently. "The dead girl walks because you oiled her boots every Christmas and taught the maids to fear her. But the living leave traces. The cyanide in the pudding was meant for Captain Redvers. He had begun to suspect. The stage blood on the keys last night was your flourish. And this," he held up the pocket watch, "this was meant to fall into the coal scuttle and be lost forever. Instead, it betrayed you. The note inside is in Sir Reginald's hand. The watch is the one you claimed never to have received. You tore the study apart searching for it after the murder, did you not? That is why the drawers were left open." Lady Eleanor's knees buckled. She caught the edge of a table, knocking over a porcelain shepherd. "Reginald was going to confess everything," she whispered. "The theft, Alice's death, all of it. I would have hanged. I could not let him." Holmes stepped forward. "Lady Eleanor Haverford, I arrest you for the murders of Sir Reginald Haverford and Miss Alice Haverford." For a moment she was statue still. Then she lunged, not at Holmes, but at the Rubens. Her fingers clawed for the canvas, nails tearing oilskin. Holmes caught her wrist. "No more hiding behind paintings, madam." She fought like a tiger, but grief and guilt had weakened her. I pinioned her arms while Holmes bound her wrists with the silk cord that had once been Alice's skipping rope, found coiled in the priest's hole beside the painting. As we led her past the Christmas tree, the first pale light of Christmas morning crept through the stained glass windows, painting her black dress with blood red and martyr green. Violet appeared at the foot of the stairs, wrapped in a dressing gown, eyes wide. "It is finished," Holmes told her gently. "Your uncle's true will is safe in my pocket. You inherit all, and your great-aunt inherits justice." Lady Eleanor lifted her head. "Tell them," she said to Violet, voice suddenly clear. "Tell them I love this house more than any living soul. That was my crime." The hall clock struck 7. Somewhere in the walls, a child's laugh echoed once, softly, then was gone, like snow melting on warm skin. Chapter 9. Holmes Sets the Trap. The house had the stunned hush of a cathedral after a funeral. Fires were laid but not lit. The great tree stood unwatered, its candles guttering in pools of wax. Every servant moved on tiptoe, as though the very walls might overhear. Holmes, however, was in his element. He had spent the afternoon transforming the music room into a stage worthy of Drury Lane. Black velvet curtains masked the windows. A single circle of 12 candles burned on the floor, throwing long shadows up the oak paneling. In the center stood a small walnut table draped in white damask, and upon it the porcelain mask of little Alice, eyes wide, mouth open in perpetual surprise. At 7 o'clock precisely, he gathered the entire household in the great hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight the ghost of Alice Haverford returns for the last time. At 11 o'clock, she will appear in the music room to name her killer. Madame Esmeralda, the renowned spiritualist, has agreed to conduct the seance. The veil is thin on Christmas night. The child will speak." A ripple of terror. Violet clutched Captain Redvers's arm. Lady Eleanor, wrists bound with silk cord, stood between two constables, her face a mask of marble. Holmes raised a hand. "No one may refuse. The innocent have nothing to fear." He had engaged a portly woman in purple bombazine and a turban the size of a pumpkin, Mrs. Amelia Fortescue of the Baker Street Bazaar, better known to the yard as Madame Esmeralda when she was not picking pockets at seances. Tonight she was magnificent, eyes rolling, rings flashing, voice pitched to the back row. "These spirits demand absolute obedience," she boomed. "All must sit in a circle, hands joined. No one breaks the chain." At 10 minutes to 11, we filed upstairs. The music room smelled of beeswax and frankincense. A low humming filled the air. Holmes's Indian Club vibrating against a hidden gong. Madame Esmeralda took the head of the table. Holmes sat opposite, turban slightly askew, his one concession to costume. I was placed at his left, revolver in my lap beneath the damask cloth. The circle formed, Violet trembling, Redvers rigid, Finch sniveling, the constables wooden-faced, Lady Eleanor between them, like a black chess queen. 23 souls in all, hands linked, breathing shallow. Madame Esmeralda began her performance. Moans, groans, a tambourine that rattled though no hand touched it. Fishing line to Holmes's toe. The candles flickered in perfect unison. Holmes again with a silk thread across the draft. At 11 exactly the temperature plunged. Frost bloomed on the inside of the windows. A child's voice, thin and clear, drifted from the ceiling. "Who stole my uncle's life?" Every head jerked upward. The plaster sunburst was open. The silk ladder hung down like a white vein. Violet screamed. Redvers half rose. Lady Eleanor's knuckles went white on the tablecloth. The voice came again, closer. "Who pressed the pillow on my face?" A small figure in white appeared on the ladder. Night dress, bare feet, porcelain mask luminous in the candlelight. It descended 3 rungs, then leapt. Chaos. Candles toppled. The table overturned. Madame Esmeralda shrieked theatrically. In the darkness I heard scuffling, a woman's snarl, the clash of steel. When I got the gas turned up again, the scene was frozen like a tableau. Lady Eleanor stood over the fallen constables, stiletto in her bound hands. Somehow she had slipped one wrist free, poised above the porcelain mask that now lay cracked on the floor. Holmes held her wrist in a grip of iron. Captain Redvers pinned her other arm. The ghost was revealed as Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, nightdress over her bombazine, face white with flour, eyes wild with terror and triumph. "I had to do it, sir," she gasped. "She confessed to me this morning about little Alice, about the master. I thought if the ghost named her in front of everyone." Holmes released Lady Eleanor to the constables and lifted the broken mask. "Admirable, Mrs. Pritchard, but unnecessary. The trap was already sprung." He turned to the company, voice ringing off the oak panels. "Lady Eleanor Haverford, you have condemned yourself with your own hand. You broke the circle exactly as I predicted you would. attacked the false ghost, and revealed the weapon you hid in your sleeve. The stiletto is the twin of the one that killed your brother. The blade still carries traces of his blood. Lady Eleanor laughed. High, dreadful. You tricked me with parlor magic. No, madam. I gave you the one thing you could not resist, the chance to silence Alice forever. You have done so, in front of 23 witnesses. He produced the pocket watch, let it swing on its chain like a pendulum. Time, Lady Eleanor. Your time is up. Outside, the snow had stopped. Moonlight poured through the windows, turning the broken mask into a shattered moon. Somewhere in the walls, a child's sigh seemed to echo once softly, then was gone. Holmes bowed to the company. Merry Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. The ghost is laid. Let us go down and light the Yule log properly, this time in celebration. As we filed out, Mrs. Pritchard pressed something into my hand, a tiny pink boot button, pearl glistening. For Miss Violet Charade, she whispered. Tell her Alice forgives. I closed my fist around it. The house felt suddenly warmer, as though a small cold hand had finally let go. Chapter 10. The Deduction. Beneath the Tree. Ormoy, every candle in the house had been brought here and kindled. The Yule log roared. Holly and ivy dripped from every beam. The tree blazed with 1,000 tiny flames that turned the faces below into a gallery of gold and shadow. The Rubens, cleaned of its century of grime, hung now above the mantel in place of the Holbein lady, the three magi glowing as though they had just stepped out of Bethlehem. At the foot of the tree stood Sherlock Holmes, simply dressed in black, the firelight catching the silver threads at his temples. Before him, in a wide half-circle, sat every soul who had lived through the terror of the past 3 days. Violet and Captain Redvers hand in hand, Mr. Finch pale but free, Mrs. Pritchard openly weeping into her apron, the constables stiff as pokers, and in the center, bound to Sir Reginald's great carver chair, Lady Eleanor Haverford, black bombazine torn, hair unbound, yet still regal as a fallen queen. Holmes raised a hand. Silence fell so complete that the crackle of the log sounded like musketry. Lady and gentlemen, he began, voice carrying to the furthest rafter. On Christmas night, we gather not for judgment, but for truth, the truth that sets the living free and the dead at peace. He stepped forward. 3 nights ago, Sir Reginald Haverford was stabbed through the heart in a locked room while carols rose below. Snow lay untouched around the house. No giant could have entered, no ghost could have struck. Yet a man died, and a child's cry has haunted these walls for 15 years. He turned to the Rubens. The motive was hidden here, a stolen masterpiece worth a fortune. Sir Reginald meant to return it and confess everything. The theft, the concealment, and worst of all, the death of little Alice Haverford on Christmas Eve 1880. Lady Eleanor's head snapped up. Lies, Holmes continued as though she had not spoken. On that night, Lady Eleanor, desperate to protect the secret of the Rubens, discovered 7-year-old Alice watching her pry at the panel. A pillow held too long silenced the child forever. Sir Reginald helped brick up both painting and sin. They told the world it was fever. They kept Alice's room untouched as perpetual penance and perpetual reminder. Violet sobbed. Redvers put an arm about her shoulders. 15 years later, Sir Reginald's conscience could bear no more. He rewrote his will, leaving everything to Violet, and planned public confession on 12th night. Lady Eleanor could not allow it. She would lose house, fortune, and liberty. Holmes moved to the Christmas tree and lifted a tiny pink boot that hung there as an ornament. She turned the very shrine of her crime into a weapon. Each year she oiled these boots, polished the doll's house, kept the nursery frozen in time, so that when the moment came, the household would believe a ghost walked. He held up the collapsible bamboo ladder. On the night of the murder, she waited until the carols began. Then, wearing Alice's boots over her own like galoshes, she climbed the secret shaft from nursery to music room ceiling, descended the silk ladder through the false sunburst, and stabbed her brother as he played in the bleak midwinter. She returned the same way, pulled up the ladder, walked backwards across the roof, dragging it to lay false child prints, then descended through the dormer into the nursery. The room below remained locked from within. The snow outside bore no trace of adult feet. Holmes laid the ladder aside. Every subsequent haunting was designed to terrorize and confuse. The rocking horse moved by fishing line, the porcelain mask, the stage blood on the keys, the poisoned pudding meant for Captain Redvers, who had begun to suspect. Even the cyanide capsule hidden in the holly sprig was Lady Eleanor's work. He turned to the bound woman. You could have stopped at one murder. Instead, you tried to silence every voice that might speak against you. Tonight, when Mrs. Pritchard appeared as the ghost to force your confession, you seized the hidden stiletto and condemned yourself before 23 witnesses. Lady Eleanor laughed, a dreadful cracked sound. Prove it, Mr. Holmes. The snow is still untouched. Holmes smiled, gentle and terrible. Madam, the snow has melted. He crossed to the tall windows and flung back the curtains. Moonlight poured in, silvering the terrace where, hours ago, the sun had done its quiet work. Every footprint, every drag mark of the bamboo ladder stood revealed in perfect clarity upon the wet flagstones. Lady Eleanor stared, transfixed. Then her head fell forward, hair curtaining her face. It was mine, she whispered. The house, the name, the life. I kept it alive when he would have killed it. I was the strong one. Holmes's voice softened. Strength that destroys innocence is no strength at all. He produced 2 documents from his pocket. Sir Reginald's true will, signed and witnessed 3 days before his death, leaves Briarwood and the entire estate to Miss Violet Haverford and Captain James Redvers. The second paper is Lady Eleanor's confession, written this afternoon in her own hand and witnessed by Inspector Gregson. The Crown will accept it. There will be no trial to stain the family further. He laid both papers on the table beside the Rubens. Violet, the house is yours. Keep it, sell it, or burn it, but let the nursery be opened at last. Let the windows breathe. Let Alice go. Violet rose, tears shining. I shall turn it into a children's hospital, in her name. Holmes bowed. Outside, the village bells began to ring, clear, joyous peals across the frosted fields. Midnight had passed. Christmas Day was ending, and a new year waited. Holmes lifted a glass of Mrs. Hudson's mulled wine that had somehow appeared at his elbow. To absent friends, he said quietly, and to the child who can finally sleep. We drank. Lady Eleanor drank too, tears cutting channels through the powder on her cheeks. When the glasses were empty, Holmes took my arm. Come, Watson, the dog cart is waiting. London is only an hour away, and Simpsons will still have a goose, if we hurry. As we stepped into the crisp night, the snow had indeed melted from the terrace, leaving every footprint bare to the stars. I looked back once. Violet and Redvers stood beneath the Rubens, arms about each other, the firelight crowning them in gold, and high in the nursery window, for one heartbeat only, a small white figure seemed to wave goodbye. Then the curtain fell, and the room was a dark. Holmes settled his scarf. Remember, Watson, the greatest crimes are committed by those who believe they deserve more than their share of happiness, and the greatest mercy is to let the innocent go free. The bells followed us all the way to the station, ringing in a Christmas that had almost been destroyed, and was, by the grace of reason and a little candlelight, saved after all.